Scotty, what is the juiciest, before we dive into all of our tiers, before we dive into when to draft and what your strategy should be when it comes to tight ends, defensive special teams, and kickers, let's unveil it all. We've been waiting this long. What is your secret for this year's fantasy football league across the board?
I'm going big on tight end. And by big, that's a very select few. And it has to be at the right spot. But tight end is so overlooked in fantasy football. And it's slept on. You look at Travis Kelce. You got him pictured there. He's a beautiful man, even clean shaven if you've seen him this week. It's been a little controversy. Anyway, Travis Kelce, the last 5 seasons, ranking in tight end in fantasy: 1, 1, 2, 1, 1. So for the last 5 years, he's been the number 1 tight end in the league in fantasy football. The other year he was second, and he was like 5 points behind Gronkowski in that year, back in his days when he was with the Patriots. And let's keep in mind, if we're talking 5 years, that includes 2 years of Alex Smith as quarterback of the Chiefs. So it's not all Pat Mahomes. With Pat Mahomes, he's 1-1-1. And he plays all the time. He's had no injury history outside of his first year in the league. Since that point, he has played all the time. He's been healthy. He's reliable. Like, listen, I'm not saying if you have the number 1 pick in the first round. First of all, if you have the number 1 pick, as we talked about, Christian McCaffrey's the obvious choice. If you have the number 2 pick, I'd probably go Dalvin Cook. 3 is where I start to think about it. And listen, I know that's crazy to take a tight end at 3. And certainly back half of the first round. If you're in the back half of the first round, you're taking a flyer on a running back, hoping that guy can produce at a top 10 level. Instead of taking a tight end that you know is going to be the top tight end in the league, as long as he stays healthy, which you can say for any player. But this guy has a track record of staying healthy. I just think it's obvious. Like, you look at last year, Travis Kelce, 207.8 fantasy points in a standard league. Next best, Darren Waller, 171. So we're talking, 36 points there. 29, 36, 37 points. From there, it drops down to 124. And that was Robert Tonyan, who just caught touchdowns. And then from there, it drops down. Number 4 was 112. You're almost cutting your production at the tight end position in half by taking the 4th best tight end from the 1st best tight end. Like, that's wild to think about. The tight end position, first of all, there's only 3 guys I would target at all. I would target Travis Kelce in the first round, especially if you're mid to late and he's there. I think it's a no-brainer. Darren Waller, I like a lot. I like Darren Waller a lot. I think he's going to get a lot of touches. He had a great year last year. He's still up and coming. I like him early second. Okay? And then Kittle. I think Kittle coming back from his injury. I think he's still, Shanahan offense. As long as he's healthy, which there's no reason I think he won't be, he's going to produce. Outside of that, if you don't get one of those 3 in the first 2 rounds, I wouldn't touch tight end for days. I would leave the rest alone. I wouldn't touch any of them for a long, long time. Let me look at these numbers that I pulled up something. So actually, Matthew Berry, fantasy expert for ESPN, put out an article, and this I didn't even read this before. I didn't even read it, and I love Matthew Berry. Didn't even read this when I said that tight end was my key position, but I saw it after the fact, and I have one other point after the fact as well that I'd like to point out. Last year, the difference at points per game at tight end between the number 1 tight end and the number 4 tight end was 8.8. The difference between the number 4 tight end and the number 15 tight end, 2.8. So the gap between 1 and 4 versus 4 to 15 is enormous.
That's insane.
And you're getting a guy that's consistently doing it every year. If you take Kelce, you're getting a guy that has been number 1 for the last 5 years, and the year he wasn't, he was number 2 by a small margin. So you're getting a guy you know will produce for you, and you don't have to worry about that position. Now, is that going to hurt you a little bit at the running back position? Yeah, but you can address that with some guys that may be around a little later that are up and coming. But because at the second half of the first round, you're drafting guys at running back that may not produce. They might fold on you. They might get hurt. They're also more injury prone than a tight end would be. Running back's more injury prone than probably any other position in fantasy. So like that's a huge nugget. And then ironically, another guy on ESPN, Mike Clay, came out with 4 days ago. So I've been hyping this position forever. So I didn't know he was going to do this. He said, hey, the ideal pick in every round of the draft. And guess who his ideal pick was in the first round?
Travis Kelce.
Travis motherfucking Kelce. He listed out reasons. He agrees with me. He's like, hey, listen, if you're picking 1, 2, maybe even 3, 4, but if you're in the back half of your first round, it should be a no-brainer. You grab Kelce, and he should be there in the back half because most people don't value tight ends like that.
Well, here's the thing.
If you're terrified to take a first-round tight end, Aaron Waller, I think, is even more than Kittle. I think he's a step above everyone else.
Here's the thing, though. Everybody is jonesing for running backs. Running backs. I mean, I've seen mock drafts, like professional mock drafts of like, big time networks that have been 10 league teams or 10, 12 team leagues, all running backs, first round. Like, that seems to be the consensus. Like, people are desperate for running backs. So if you're going through your draft and you see running back after running back after running back after running back, we talked about this in wide receivers. Don't take the 6th best running back. Take the number 1 wide receiver. Well, that applies to tight ends as well. Only for a certain time frame, right? There's only going to be a few guys that fall in this category of tight ends where you want to make sure you prioritize them right off the bat. And the only one that should be going in the first round is Travis Kelce. I know I have, we'll go into tiers here in a second. George Kittle and Darren Waller, you nailed my top 3 in the first tier. Darren Waller, Kittle, and Kelce be in the top 3. I wouldn't take Kittle or Waller in the first round. Maybe if it circles around in the round 2 or 3, you get to that point and maybe you think about it. But outside of that, target wide receivers. If Kelce's there at the end of your first round, hit him, man. Don't be ashamed to be a little bit bold and take that tight end, because that production over the course of a season, of a fantasy football season, makes a difference. You heard Scott talk about these different stats about the difference between the top 2 or 3 and the rest of them. It doesn't matter. Back in the day, tight end didn't matter. You could take a tight end the last 3 picks, and they all averaged about the same. This was always historically the thing. And maybe you had one that stood out you took in the 8th round or the 7th round. Maybe. But that's changed, guys. That's a different story this time. And you got to prioritize. If you see these guys dropping to the latter end of the first round or the second round, it might be worth taking a flyer on.
I did the same thing back in the day with Gronk. When Gronk was above and beyond everyone else, I didn't understand why people didn't value him more. And I took him typically, in the second round, and I won a lot of leagues because he dominated the tight end position way above anyone else that was out there at that time. And further reference, so I'm not saying to take Kelce number 1. If you're the number 1 pick, as I've described, don't take Travis Kelce. But you look at the running back position last year. You have Derrick Henry in standard leagues, dominated 314 points. Now, I don't expect him to do that again this year.
They're going to be
2,000 yards.
They're going to be throwing the ball a lot this year.
Certainly more, and the wear and tear, you got to save him up a little bit. Kamara 294 and Dalvin Cook 293. So those top 3 guys really, really good. Number 4, 216. So 3 was 293. 4, Jonathan Taylor, 216. So if you have the number 4 pick in the draft And you can take Jonathan Taylor, who had 216 points, or you could take Travis Kelce, who only had 207 last year in a standard league. And you're like, Jonathan Taylor scored more points, so I'll take him. No, because we talked about the number 4 tight end had 112 points. Guess where from 216 to 112 at running back position, you dive down to literally the 33rd ranked running back. Like the gap after those elite few at running back to where the next level is and like the competitiveness is just enormous. So unless you can get a Christian McCaffrey, a Dalvin Cook, and probably a Kamara, and granted, this depends also on the league because I think it's even accentuated if you're in a PPR league or a half-point PPR league because you know Kelsey's going to get a ton of catches. So that only plays it up more. But even in a standard league, I'm taking certainly if I have pick 6 and beyond and Kelsey's there, I'm taking him in the first round and I'm going to be thrilled.
Yeah.
And you can call me a homer because I'm a Chiefs fan, but to me, this just makes mathematical sense.
No,
it really does.
It's common sense. And I knew you were going this direction. I had a feeling you were going this way because I've seen these similar numbers and I've been like all over them. But let's dive in though. Let's dive into the tiers. Let's go through this. Yeah. Obviously, you know that the top tier here is Travis Kelce, George Kittle with the 49ers, and Darren Waller with the Raiders. So this is the cream of the crop. These 3 are the cream of the crop. After this, it drops off massively, right? Yep. As you know, right now we're seeing Kittle drafted average draft position around 9. I mean, that's huge. That's something you never see. If you've been in fantasy football for a while, you don't see that very often. You've been seeing it over the last 2 or 3 years where it's been rising a bit with, you know, like you mentioned, Gronk and Kronk. That's fun. And Kelsey. Kronk, you know, from what was that movie, that Disney movie? Emperor's New Groove.
Okay.
Kronk.
Yeah, I didn't know where you're going there.
Yeah, I gotcha. Anyways, I digress. They reside. Kittle and Waller currently reside in the early middle 3rd round average draft position. So you could still get a solid tight end even in the 2nd or 3rd round. Again, you want to really target those guys. So, yeah, that's where we're at. Going into Box in the chat. Can you watch a highlight? Yeah, we could watch some highlights. By the way, Box, thanks for the follow, Box Water.
Appreciate there we go. It. Killing the game tonight.
We are 4 of 3 in followers tonight. Box, thank you for the follow. We are happy to have you as one of our lab rats in the Action Lab. Appreciate it. Yeah, what do you got? You got something specific you want to check out? Let us know. But yeah, so as we're going through this a little bit more, getting into some of the tier 2, you might want to hesitate and maybe pump the brakes a little bit on what you want to do here with your second pick. And Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson are 3 guys that you might want to target in that tier 2. Tier 2 usually sees a significant decrease from that tier 1 in fantasy production. That's not to say tier 2 can't break through and finish the season as a top tier, but it's tough to predict, right? You don't know what you're exactly getting from that standpoint. So, you know, you're still getting something you can be comfortable throwing in that starting tight end role. You just don't know if it's going to be a consistent, you know, payoff, right? Kyle Pitts, average draft position is around 51, which is a little too high right now for my taste. He's tough comfortably. He's tough to like fit in with guys like when you could draft a Robert Woods or something along those lines in this range. I would rather go wide receiver. Try to fill out your depth at running back, maybe. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with some of this stuff. But yeah, what are your thoughts here? Again, in this little tier 2, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson. Huddle or Box, I'll take a look at this here in a second while Scott talks a little bit about this tier 2.
Yeah. Listen, I appreciate people loving Kyle Pitts, and his athletic profile and his ability moving forward is through the moon. I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit on him this early. Usually tight ends year one don't throw out huge numbers. And listen, I think people are too excited. Some fantasy football people are like, oh, this is the best tight end we've seen in the draft in a long time. So he's being overvalued a little bit in my mind. The other two, I agree with the tier, though. I think those are the three guys beyond those first three to target. Mark Andrews was actually number 2 tight end the prior year in 2019. The problem is he had another tight end on the roster and that did a lot in Baltimore as well that freed up space for him, and he was a little injury prone last year. So I don't know how much I trust him. I think he'll put up solid, not spectacular numbers. TJ Hawkinson is an athletic freak. I worry about the Detroit team in general, but they're going to be down a lot. So they're going to be throwing the ball a lot. The problem is it's probably Jared Goff throwing him the ball, and that's a concern. I think the coach is a disaster. I think Detroit, as I've talked about, is in line to maybe be the worst team in football this year. So I have concerns. Although I love TJ Hawkinson from a pure talent standpoint, I have concerns on his surrounding talent and what that means for him. But from a pure talent standpoint, I like TJ Hawkinson this year the most because he's had some experience. Kyle Pitts moving forward, but this year I like TJ Hawkinson if you can get him late enough. But like I said, after these first three, I wouldn't touch a tight end for the next prior to round, I don't know, I'm throwing out a number like 8 maybe. Like I'm not touching a tight end after those first three if it were me. That doesn't mean that these guys can't be, and I agree with the tier there, but I have concerns about these guys.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Now, by the way, Boxwater, saw your little highlight video. Looks like you have a little high school highlight video here.
Yeah, I saw the link, and I'm like, this is clearly a high school clip, which I can appreciate.
Yeah, no, I'm loving it, man. Hey, Boxwater, we might throw this up at the end of the stream here. Can't wait to check it out. Don't go anywhere, man. We'll throw it up. We'll have a good time checking it out. Let's see what you got, man. I'm excited to check it out a little bit further. We have a little bit more to get through on this tight end and some of the kicker draft, defensive special team stuff. But don't go anywhere. We're going to highlight it at the end. How about that? Appreciate the follow. Can't wait to check it out here at the very end. Love it, man. Love it. So as we get into some of the tier 3s, now you're getting into some of the ones that like you need to get a little bit more. This is going to be your average tight end starting position here. And maybe like you can count on these guys to be a semi-starter for you for a little bit, but you can't expect them to be consistent. And we start that out with Noah Fant, which I think has the highest ceiling of all these. Noah Fant's already proven that he's been. I'm a Broncos guy, so obviously I'm a big hype train on Noah Fant. But the production is there, man. He's coming up, and he's a big target, and he's a mismatch, guys. He can make some things happen. So keep an eye on him as a sleeper. He might be in that top 2, top 1 tier eventually in his career. He's not there yet. He needs to prove it. Plus, quarterback is kind of a question. So you want to make sure you're pumping the brakes on some of these guys. Also, Tyler Higbee with the Rams, Dallas Goedert with the Eagles, Mike Gesicki with the Dolphins, Logan Thomas with the Washington football team, and Robert Tonyan Jr. has kind of been climbing some boards a little bit with the Packers because, obviously Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball. He likes his tight ends a little bit. So keep an eye on Robert Tonyan to kind of climb some of these. But just a half of these players finished in the top 12 in standard formats last season. Tonyan finished 3rd, Gesicki finished 6th, and Thomas finished 7th. Logan Thomas in Washington. Those 3 will likely see a return to the middle of the pack after breakout seasons, but touchdown luck will have a lot to do with that, right? So you'll have to feel that out a little bit. So keep an eye there on like the touchdown production. When it came to Miami, they brought in Hunter Long, the third round of the 2021 draft, while Gieske will maintain starting tight end role. It feels like the Dolphins are planning to incorporate Long into the offense a little bit more. So keep an eye on that. That's a weird one. You don't want to draft Gieske too high, and then all of a sudden you get the rug pulled out from under you, and Hunter Long ends up being a little bit more of an impact player for Miami. So keep an eye on that. Obviously, young quarterbacks like to target tight ends a little bit as a safety blanket. Don't get sucked in a little bit too much on a Gieske when it comes to tight ends. That's just my opinion.
I like Gieske, but I think it is Gesicki.
Just Gesicki? You know me in name pronunciations, man.
Yeah. Gesicki was actually a guy for me last year that I'd like to target at times in like your weekly fantasy because he caught touchdowns. And I actually think I like him a little bit because I think Tua likes to throw the middle of the football field, and that's conducive to a tight end. So I think Gesicki's a nice sleeper later pick in like your tier 3 when you're talking about. You talked about Noah Fant. I worry about Noah Fant.
Okay.
Not from an athletic profile, because I think he athletically is really, really solid. He jumped from his rookie year 562 yards all the way to 673 the next year. So
did he hit more touchdowns though?
No, he had 3 each year, which is real bad. He had 3 touchdowns both year. And now you're adding back Cortland Sutton. This offense has a lot of other weapons around it that they could throw touchdowns to if they want. I just don't love Fant blowing up like people think. Like yardage wise, I certainly don't. Maybe his touchdowns, but he's not like a guy when you're inside the 10 you're gonna throw a jump ball to. He's not that type of tight end. He's more the athlete that can break open and do that. He's not your large tight end that you throw a fade route to and make sure he goes up and gets it in the end zone. So he's not a guy that's going to ever touch a ton of touchdowns. And I worry about him in that offense where they're adding Cortland Sutton back. You have Jerry Jeudy, you have KJ Hamler coming on. You still have Tim Patrick. Like there's a lot of other guys to throw to. I just don't think there's enough to go around for Fant. Dallas Goedert, maybe in Philly. Jalen Hurts probably is another guy that likes to throw the middle of the field when he can. I'm not a big guy with Robert Tonyan. Like, he only put up those stats because of the touchdowns. Like, his targets were like, he had like less than 60 targets last year. And he caught he had 59 targets and caught 52 of them. And then had like 15 touchdowns. Like, you just don't see that. You can't historically rely on that. So that's why I'm down on tight ends in general after that. After those first 3 especially, I would not value a tight end for a while and then just hope, like, I don't know, you could get like Blake Jarwin for Dallas and they're going to throw the ball a lot and he's going to be their starting tight end. So he's a piece. Jared Cook's probably going to be the starter with the Chargers. He's underachieved on who he was in his career, but if you're taking him, in the 12th round, take a flyer. I would go flyer rather than overvalue a tight end that hasn't proven he can do it after those first 3. That's my opinion. That's why I think this position is so important to grab one of those first 3, especially I would say one of those first 2, and especially that first one.
You want to sleep better at night knowing you have Kelsey or one of those top tier.
With Kelsey, more consistent than any player in any other position over the last 5 years, and it's not close.
Yeah. So let's dive into just some of these tier 4. And I think we stop at tier 4. I think at that point, it's like you don't know what you're really getting. It's just like plugging and playing with like maybe a certain matchup that might fit. Maybe it's something that you might want to like, think about using as maybe a flex play potentially. but you should have something a little bit better at that point. But if you draft early, obviously. But tier 4, you have Jonnu Smith, Patriots, Irv Smith Jr., Vikings, Hunter Henry with the Patriots. Patriots do use a lot of tight ends in their offense. The problem is they use multiple tight ends, so you don't know who's going to get the more catches. We've seen that plenty of times with elite tight ends going to New England, and all of a sudden they just fizzle out because they have used like 3 tight ends, and it's like, what? Like, why is this a thing? Blake Jarwin with the Cowboys, you mentioned, could be an interesting situation for them throwing the ball with, that offense. It's going to be a lot more potent this year. Jared Cook, Chargers, you mentioned as well. Another one that could be really good. Rob Gronkowski, I feel like is a boom or bust. I just don't know what you're going to get from him. He could have a huge 3 touchdown game, and then he could have a 0 week for like 3 straight weeks. That's what I feel like with Rob Gronkowski. So I don't.
Someone's going to draft him off name. So if you drafted Rob Gronkowski, you took him too early.
Yeah, he's like one of those sketchy ones that you're like, you might get him and you might have 0 productivity for like 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden you bench him. And he's that guy that gets 3 touchdowns in a week.
Well, let's not forget that they're bringing back O.J. Howard, who was a first-round tight end, who was hurt last year.
Absolutely.
He's going to be back in the picture. So he's, maybe, they have Gronkowski and Cameron Brate. Once again, most loaded roster in the league, just to have a problem at quarterback.
Yeah. Last one in this tier 4 is Evan Ingram with the Giants. They're going to try to throw the ball a little bit more. Obviously, they've used tight ends quite a bit. And Evan Ingram has been able to catch some touchdown passes here and there. He's just not consistent. He failed to live up to the hype in just about every season as a pro, though. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, everyone's hyped him up, and he hasn't really exactly, like, been that guy. So why would this year be any different? But again, that's why he's in tier 4. You don't know how consistent he's going to continue to be. He's always a big name that always comes off the board early. So don't fall into the trap with Evan Ingram either. Yep. So that's where we're at with tight ends. We could get deeper, but at this point, we're getting into, you find these guys, whether it's Zach Ertz, O.J. Howard, Eric Ebron, Austin Hooper, Gerald Everett with the Seahawks now. All these guys you'll find on the back and forth, on and off the free agent wire. So you'll find them. Don't worry about them. Don't draft them early on or at all.
Targeting late, I'd target like a Logan Thomas or an Irv Smith Jr.
Yeah.
Those are 2 guys that I think have some upside.
Yeah, that's about it. But let's dive in. Let's go into some other strategies here. We're a little over, but we love going overtime. We're going overtime tonight, and that is defense special teams, and that's going to be a little bit more of a, again, you're taking defense special teams and kickers with your last couple picks. Don't overdraft these positions. Keep those in mind. By the way, Boxwater, I haven't forgot about you. We're going to throw your little video up here a little bit at the end. So hang tight. Don't go anywhere. Defense special teams. Let's go over the top tiers in this grouping here. Baltimore Ravens have consistently been at the top of lists when it comes to defense special teams. They are getting a little bit older, but off the board, they're going around 130th, which is around the 11th round in a 12 team league ish. So again, even the top tier defense special teams isn't going until the second to last round. Don't overdraft defense special teams, guys. I just don't do it. We're going to share our TikTok at the end of this too, which I made fun of just fantasy football drafting in general, but yeah, we'll touch on that, but don't do it, guys. The best defense, I see defensive coming off in like 8th round, 7th, 8th rounds sometimes. People are like overhyping defense. Don't do it, man. Don't overdraft when it comes to this. Ravens are going to, going a few picks, into that 11th round. and all have some decent upside, but none of them, I mean, depending on your rules of your league, you can pick up defenses and play matchups sometimes, right? You do kind of hurt your waiver wire stuff at some points, but if you have no issues and your team's in a good place, pick up a matchup defense where, if, let's say your defense is on bye week, pick up a matchup that maybe that week is favorable. Maybe it's not top tier, like top third of the league, but maybe it's middle of the road where you can get some decent fantasy points. You don't need to overdraft on defense. So again, you got Baltimore Ravens 1, Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2, returning a lot of veterans, Pittsburgh Steelers 3, New England Patriots 4, Los Angeles Rams 5. By the way, do you see Minnesota Vikings in that list, Scotty?
No, we talked about how good they're going to be based off the Athletic. But they were sixth last year in fantasy points on defense.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't even have them in my tier 2. So tier 2, Miami Dolphins has a pretty decent defense. We'll see how that ends up carrying over. Plus that division is not great, so you got to keep in mind divisions, guys. If it's a bad division, defenses might have a better shot at continuously getting good production, right? So a defense or a division like the AFC South, you might want to take a flyer maybe in that 11th round on a Miami Dolphins defense. Washington football team, Buffalo Bills, Indianapolis Colts, Kansas City Chiefs made the list here in my tier 2. They're going to be much improved, and they're playing against some defenses, or offenses like a Chargers team, still young, Herbert. You got the Denver and the Raiders, right? A lot of teams that are not great offensively, maybe. So Kansas City Chiefs, not a bad team to take a flyer on. And New Orleans, that's a bad division, man. So you mentioned Tom Brady not being as good as you think he's going to be. Maybe you take a flyer on New Orleans defense that's really good. So that's another one you can take just a thought on. Tier 3, you're getting into the 49ers, Cardinals, Vikings, Browns, Broncos, Seahawks, Tennessee Titans, and Green Bay Packers. Here, again, it's not going to separate itself enough for you to take these really, really early. See what's best available. Take what you think is going to be the best for your team at that point, and then go with it. If you have a hunch on a certain team, take it, but don't do it before the last couple rounds.
Go
ahead, Scotty.
We're talking about defense. I'm all about matchups on defense. I think it's a huge mistake unless you get a defense that's just on fire, creating turnovers, putting up defensive touchdowns or special teams touchdowns. I wouldn't touch a team. Like last year, the Rams finished number 1 at 151 points. Keep in mind that teams don't, fantasy football rosters don't keep more than one defensive team, and a lot of them switch week to week. So you look at the number 12 ranking last year, it was 106 compared to 151. So you got a 40-point gap. It's almost the same gap between 1 and 2 at tight end last year. So no, I would go complete matchup based on defense, because you can find a team that's playing a bad offensive team that week and just fill it in, because it's a little unpredictable. You're hoping a team, maybe there's teams that sack the quarterback more or create more turnovers, but touchdowns is really where you're going to make your heyday on defense.
True.
And relying on a defense to score touchdowns is a mistake. You just can't rely on it. There's a good amount from year to year a luck factor in there. So I wouldn't touch defense. Defense, I would actually not pick until the last round, because I know I'm switching that every year. I usually, with kicker, pick a kicker, roll with that kicker until their bye week, pick up another kicker, and then probably just stay with that kicker. I'm also indifferent on kicker.
Yeah.
But I would pick defense last. That would be my last round of my draft.
Let's dive into kicker real quick. And, we have a couple things we want to get to. We have Boxwater, who wants to throw out this little video. We'll highlight that. We have a couple things we want to show on our TikTok that we want to promote a little bit. So let's get to that here in a second, but let's just dive into some kickers. But this is literally the bottom of the barrel, last pick. Don't overdraft kickers either. Guys, I know Justin Tucker is going to be the best for the Ravens. I know Harrison Butker is going to be the best for the Chiefs. That doesn't mean you need to draft them in like the 9th round. Like, get depth at wide receiver, running back. Get depth at tight end. Get backup quarterback, like, even is going to give you more value than a kicker. But let's just dive into kickers real quick. Justin,
without looking, if you could name the kicker that finished first in fantasy points last year, and I would give you 10 guesses, and you wouldn't get it. You wouldn't get it. I didn't even know this guy. I just looked it up. I didn't even know this guy existed.
Seriously?
Yes.
Ooh. Now you got me throwing for a loop. Now
you could even throw the team out. I'd give you 10 teams and you wouldn't get it.
Maybe Bills kicker because they had a good season last year.
Third.
Okay. Maybe I'm thinking of the best offenses. Maybe let's go Rams. LA Rams.
No. I don't know if they had injuries, but the top guy was 30th. They might have had injuries.
Okay. Butker, Chiefs.
Yep, 13th.
With an offense like that? Yep. Man. The only other ones I could think of maybe are shit, man. Now you got me throwing through a loop. I'm thinking of the best maybe so I feel like the AFC North, they kick a lot of field goals. So maybe Justin Tucker? I mean, obviously he's
tied for 7th.
Man, okay. Let's just hit it. Hit me with it.
Jason Sanders, the kicker for the Miami Dolphins. Like, there's no rhyme or reason. Miami wasn't a great offensive team by any means last year.
What?
The number 2 kicker was Young Ho Koo for Atlanta. Like, these aren't teams that are prolific offenses. It's just random at kicker. People don't get it. Like, hey, yeah, some years your offense scores touchdowns, and that is great for your offense outside of your kicker if you have them in fantasy. Some years they settle for field goals. I would not ever invest in a kicker beyond the last round.
It's a crapshoot, man.
I mean, you have to have one on the roster. You could even not take one in your draft, and then prior to the season, take one off the waiver wire and release a guy from your team. I would actually do that before taking a kicker in the draft.
It's a crapshoot, man. That's why you don't only take this with the, second to last, if not last pick in the draft. So don't go crazy with this, guys. I don't even think I have tiers for this. I just have rankings. And those rankings don't mean anything. They literally don't mean a damn thing.
If you would have told me Jason Sanders was the kicker for Miami last year, I would have called you a liar. And he finished first in fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, I've
never heard of him.
Usually I think of the Saints, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bills,
yep.
Like those high-flying offenses. And Packers, maybe, Mason Crosby is always a Colorado boy, always been, good. I mean, honestly, yeah. I mean, outside of that, you're like...
What I will say is Jason Sanders, I just looked up his stats. There's something to be said for taking a warm weather kicker or an indoor kicker.
True.
If you're going to, especially late in the year when the weather starts getting worse in places. Jason Sanders went 8 of 9 from 50 plus yards last year. So that's no joke.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, man. Don't do it. You got your marching orders. Know what you want with your fantasy football tight ends. If you have a chance to get it, man,